By the late 1960s, Hong Kong had become a successful economic system, equipped with the necessary conditions: a broad trade network, a solid industrial foundation, a modern international banking system, comprehensive infrastructure and public services, as well as a high level of education and available labor force. Since the 1960s, manufacturing had become the backbone of Hong Kong's economy, peaking at 30.9% of GDP by 1970. During this time, Hong Kong was one of the most industrialized societies in the world, though most factories were small and did not require advanced technology. Over the next decade, manufacturing's contribution to GDP remained between 27% and 28%, but its importance gradually declined. Labor-intensive exports struggled to thrive due to rising wages and land prices, labor shortages, regional competition, and a slowdown in Western economies, which hindered Hong Kong's ability to compete with low-cost products in the global market. The local industry needed to transform to adapt to the new circumstances. To support industrial development, the government not only encouraged entrepreneurs to shift investments toward capital and technology-intensive production, but also developed large industrial parks to attract higher-tech industries to the city. Significant changes in Hong Kong's economic development occurred in the late 1970s, as the service sector, particularly finance, began to rise, marking the second post-war economic transformation. Additionally, after 3 decades of stagnation, the rapid economic growth of the mainland revitalized local re-export trade, accelerating Hong Kong's economic transition. With Japan unwilling to open its financial markets, Singapore briefly emerged as a competitor in Hong Kong's financial sector. However, after China implemented its reform and opening up policies in the late 1970s, numerous multinational corporations and banks established operations in Hong Kong, allowing the city to surpass Singapore and become a burgeoning international financial center, following London and New York. The banking sector expanded rapidly, and various financial instruments such as stock markets, futures markets, and gold markets gradually took shape. Hong Kong's financial industry moved toward internationalization and diversification, and real estate development significantly boosted the local economy. Unfortunately, this led to a wave of luxurious redevelopment, where new buildings often used expensive materials to showcase corporate status or prioritize rapid construction, neglecting environmental resources and energy consumption. Buildings became mere commodities, overlooking their social and community impacts. Consequently, Hong Kong was filled with environmentally insensitive architectural designs lacking local character. On the other hand, the substantial influx of foreign capital, particularly from Japan and the United States, had a positive impact on the local economy. By the late 1970s, Chinese-funded companies began to surpass British firms, and Chinese entrepreneurs established 3 stock exchanges to compete with the British-dominated Hong Kong Stock Exchange. From the 1960s into the 1970s, local GDP grew at an average annual rate of 10%, quadrupling by the early 1980s. Even by international standards, Hong Kong ranked in the upper tier, rising to the forefront globally a decade later, an undeniable achievement. However, for many citizens, the living standards of new immigrants did not improve correspondingly. This was partly due to middle-aged workers being unable to find employment in the new economic model after leaving industrial production. The turmoil of 1966 to 67 prompted the government to significantly increase funding, to provide more opportunities for youth and implement measures to improve housing, sanitation, and social welfare to alleviate social discontent. The government also recognized that better attending to citizens' interests and needs would make it easier for society to accept and identify with the colonial administration. Starting in the 1970s, the government focused on developing and popularizing education, implementing free primary education in 1971, and achieving 9 years of free education 7 years later. Consequently, children aged 6 to 15 could finally attend school under more equitable conditions. An interesting phenomenon was that, due to free education, students of similar ages often exhibited significant differences in learning abilities. This phenomenon sometimes occurred within a single family, as the local education system gradually matured. The Curriculum Development Council, set up by the Education Department, was responsible for defining the curriculum, replacing the previously imported British curriculum, while textbooks were gradually written by local teachers and scholars, reducing reliance on imported materials. In the 1970s, the content taught in schools changed significantly compared to the previous generation, with secondary education incorporating both Chinese and British educational characteristics, mainly using both Chinese and English as teaching languages. However, due to market demand, most schools were English medium, resulting in many junior secondary students lacking adequate English proficiency, and teachers' English abilities often fell short, leading to a mix of English and Chinese in classrooms, making it difficult for many students to grasp the learning content and master English, ultimately affecting their university education. In the 1970s, the government set student quotas based on market demands, rather than adjusting them according to secondary school aspirations and abilities. As a result, despite many students qualifying for university entrance, they were still turned away due to limited enrollment. However, as the economy developed, there was a pressing demand for specialized education in various sectors, prompting the government to actively expand higher education. In the 1980s, several institutions were established, such as the City University of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts, and the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, along with increased funding and support for higher education institutions. In terms of housing, before 1973, over 1 million residents in Hong Kong lived in public housing, including rental housing and new villages under the Housing Authority, such as North Point Village and Choi Hung Village. However, the Hong Kong government did not have a comprehensive housing policy until the 10-year housing program, implemented from 1973 to 1982, which marked the beginning of a long-term and comprehensive housing development blueprint. Under the new policy, previously fragmented departments were consolidated into a unified, legally recognized Hong Kong Housing Authority, resulting in improvements in both the design and quality of newly built public housing, as well as noticeable enhancements in housing management. Unfortunately, challenges such as bureaucratic restructuring, the global economic recession triggered by the oil crisis, dwindling available land for development, and an influx of residents from the mainland prevented the plan from achieving its full potential. A notable accomplishment of the 10-year housing program was the relocation of urban populations to new towns and the use of public housing to promote the development of the new territories. Planners aimed to create a self-sufficient societal balance by providing facilities in the new towns to meet residents' basic living and working needs, fostering a diverse and harmonious society. However, neither of these goals was fully realized, particularly as residents faced significant employment difficulties. Nevertheless, the improved living environment and shorter waiting times for public housing attracted many urban residents to the new towns. The construction of new towns in the 1970s and 80s led to internal migration of millions. Yet society did not experience instability, and experiences from other regions were relatively reassuring. Public transportation also saw rapid development during this period. In 1972, the Cross Harbor Tunnel opened, directly linking Hong Kong Island and Kowloon. Between 1979 and 1980, the completion of the Underground Railway and the electrification of the Kowloon-Canton Railway further accelerated public transport development, allowing residents on Hong Kong Island, Kowloon, or in the new territories to feel a shared sense of belonging to one place, Hong Kong, rather than merely being associated with a specific region. Moreover, the development of the new territories blurred the boundaries between urban and rural areas, making it less foreign to city residents. A significant concern for citizens was corruption. In the early 1970s, bribery permeated every corner of the government, with most departments directly related to public welfare, such as the police, fire department, civil service, municipal affairs, flag affairs, and immigration, being involved, and even instances of organized corruption occurring. Daily interactions between citizens and government departments were often plagued by relentless extortion. In early 1974, Governor Murray MacLehose established the Independent Commission Against Corruption (ICAC), ushering in a new era for Hong Kong. However, the commission faced severe challenges. With many police officers arrested, morale within the police force plummeted. In October 1977, thousands of police officers marched to demand a reduction in the commission's powers, with some demonstrators even storming the Commission's headquarters. Fearing a police strike, MacLehose eventually issued a conditional amnesty, pledging not to pursue past corruption offenses. Meanwhile, a generation born after the war gradually emerged as a pillar of society, identifying as Hong Kongers. Compared to their predecessors, they were less tied to specific communities or origins, and their open-mindedness allowed them to exhibit a new spirit in work and life. Many young individuals from farming or working-class backgrounds became professionals or ascended to the middle class, fostering a sense of ambition and openness during this period that distinguished Hong Kong from other Chinese communities, closely linked to the government's proactive intervention policies. Locally born Hong Kongers began to dominate mass media, leading cultural trends and gradually enhancing their sense of belonging to Hong Kong. Once this awakening occurred, combined with the increasing accessibility of education, citizens began to voice new demands for social improvement. This led to a series of protests, strikes, and student walkouts, including the Chinese language movement in 1970, the Anti-Diaoyu Islands movement in 1971, anti-corruption demonstrations in 1973, a teachers' strike, actions by nurses, the surprise secondary school incident in 1976, and the boat incident in 1978. These activities were not coincidental. They were fundamentally social movements rather than political ones. The leaders of these movements were typically students from colleges or universities, teachers, social workers, church reformers, and labor organizers, with no direct ties to politics. Compared to the violence and irrational unrest of the 1950s and 60s, these activities, although violating laws against unlawful assembly and associations, were generally peaceful and orderly, gradually transforming Hong Kong's social landscape. They achieved certain results and allowed civil society to take root in Hong Kong. To facilitate peaceful mutual checks and balances between the public and the government, both society and the government gradually opened up, with citizens increasingly participating in public affairs. Different interest groups engaged in rational dialogue rather than violent confrontation. Politically, the entirety of the 1970s saw no substantial changes in Hong Kong, nor was there political reform, a frequent point of criticism against MacLehose's successors. Of some significance was the abolishment in 1981 of strict voter qualification restrictions, allowing all permanent residents aged 21 and older who had lived in Hong Kong for 7 years to register as legal voters. As a result, the number of voters surged from over 30,000 to more than 700,000. In May 1982, Governor Edward Youd visited Hong Kong. That October, negotiations between China and Britain on the future of Hong Kong began, lasting 2 years. In December 1984, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and Chinese Premier Zhao Ziyang signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration, and by the end of May 1985, both countries exchanged ratifications, agreeing that the entire Hong Kong region would return to Chinese rule in 1997, with Hong Kong becoming a special administrative region enjoying a high degree of autonomy, except in matters of foreign affairs and defense. Thus began the transition period,